right, welcome to our Filler Up conference call, the ALERT program and preventing big behaviors with little strategies. I'm Shellenberger, and I'm joined today by my colleague and friend, MaryAnn Trott. Welcome, MaryAnn.
Hello, everyone.
I know many of you have already had the pleasure of, or I hope you have, had the pleasure of hearing MaryAnn speak, attended one of her workshops, or even read one or both of her books. And I'll include information about her extensive experience in your resources sheet, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things here, give MaryAnn some of or most of the cred that she deserves here. So MaryAnn's an education and outreach manager with the autism programs at the Center for Development and Disability. She's a board-certified behavior analyst. She's worked with the Albuquerque Public Schools for more than 30 years. You can't possibly be true. How do you defy age that way, MaryAnn? But she knows from where she speaks, and she's seen a lot of it. So she'll give us a lot of good advice that way. She's given many professional development seminars throughout the country, and also she is the author of Sensibilities, Understanding Sensory Integration, and Behave, Sensory Processing and Behavior Strategies Working Together. And I don't get any royalties from her books, but I encourage you to look up these incredible resources. I have learned so much from her and from her books. So take that for what it's worth. They're great resources to have around, very easy and user-friendly to read, and yet quite stunningly accurate. So MaryAnn and her husband Wayne are the proud parents of 2 grown children, and you're soon to be a grandmother, which again, that's that age-defying thing we were talking about, MaryAnn.
Yep, there's a little boy on the way.
Awesome. All right, we'll open with a quote this time that I thought was really appropriate. Some is probably because I'm a Philadelphia gal in terms of where I grew up, so I have a great fondness for Ben Franklin here today. But his quote was, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." And I know many of you have heard that, and that seemed really appropriate to our topic today because MaryAnn was the one that suggested this topic to me, and I jumped on it. I said, this sounds really great. I know a lot of us have a lot of questions about how we can look at our sensory supports and strategies as preventative versus getting ourselves in trouble and reinforcing the wrong things at the wrong time. So MaryAnn will help to straighten us out a little bit here. She only has 30 minutes to help us do that. So we're going to kind of emphasize 2 general themes. The first one and we've done this in almost all of our calls, is to keep it really simple. That what I find so often is we have lots of advice and information out there, but if we don't keep it simple and workable and start with something that we're comfortable with and work from there, it's really easy to get overwhelmed and then we don't do anything. So better to keep it simple and work up from there. And then the second thing is setting folks up for success, and that's a huge emphasis that I know MaryAnn has had, Mary Sue and me through the work with the ALERT program over all of our decades there. We certainly want to make sure to look at that. And that'll be a big topic, I think, today in terms of how we view behavior and sensory information, is how do we set folks up for success in a way that doesn't compromise what we need to help to do for them to support their behavior. So we have a lot of websites and resources out there with some good suggestions. You'll be receiving, I want to remind you that you'll receive your information sheet, an email document after the call here that has the references and the resources that we mentioned during the call, and then even some that we may not get to mention. So don't worry about scrambling and trying to write things down as we're talking. The information will be there, and you'll be able to access it after the fact here. So MaryAnn, just talk to us a little bit about your view of the use of sensory strategies in behavior programs, because you've been around us OT types you've tolerated us for a long time. So let's go ahead and hear some, how you're looking at it in that preventative model there.
Well, I think that I've learned from you for a really long time, and I think one of the things about sensory strategies is they're fun. And children enjoy engaging in them, and it's something that they look forward to and something that's really helpful for them for the most part. And so it's easy to default to a sensory strategy that a child who maybe is having a tough time or is beginning to object to something or whine or cry or fuss, it's easy to default to a sensory strategy because we know that's going to stop some of the difficult behaviors. But really, in terms of using it in the lifespan, you want to look at what we can do to prevent difficult behaviors. We all know it's important important to get a good night's sleep before we engage in really difficult tasks the
Absolutely.
next day. That's preventative for, having a really low engine or not being able to focus on things. Many of us set ourselves up for various tasks. Some of us who are a little less social than others have to really set ourselves up either by talking to ourselves or doing something we really enjoy before we go to a party or before we have to talk to a lot of folks. We all do this sort of automatically. So it's really important to help our children to learn that they need to think about preventative strategies when times are going to be overly stimulating or really boring or just difficult in some ways. And so by helping them think about that, we're teaching them to do it for themselves. And that ultimately is the goal, is to help them to be independent in knowing what they need and when they're going to need it.
Absolutely, and I think that helping to support that is just going to create a lot of the resiliency that so many of our individuals really don't have or are lacking in some of the ways. One of the things that you and I talked about a lot here is, and I'll include myself in this category, that we don't usually get taught. I've had the luxury of being around you and learning from you on this, easy for me to say, that we don't get taught as therapists, so I'll diss on the therapists here for a minute, about the importance of when to use the sensory strategies and how to talk to our colleagues about what we're doing so that we know the right timing. Timing is crucial here, so talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I think a natural tendency for all of us, and having spent many years in the classroom, it certainly was a tendency for me, is to notice that something is happening with a child, notice that they're beginning to get irritated or they're beginning to object to doing whatever the task was, or noticing that they're just getting antsy or squirrely or whatever word that you use for that, what we all recognize when we see it. And one of the mistakes I think that's easy to make is to say, oops, you're having a rough time now, why don't you go outside and swing for a little while, or let's take a walk around the track, or let's go bounce on the ball, or let's do something else, which with all the best intentions we're hoping is going to re-regulate that nervous system and help them to become calm and organized. And all of those strategies do exactly that. However, if we use those strategies after a child has already shown the signs of not being able to tolerate a certain situation or having a difficulty in a certain situation, what we've done is reinforce that behavior. So the child the next time will, through the process of learning, through antecedents and consequences, the next time the child will reason, not manipulatively, but just because that's what they've learned. Oh, the last time that I was getting tired of doing this is what I did, and I got to go outside and swing.
Right.
So in terms of using sensory strategies, it's really important to use them, and this is a big behaviorist word, but non-contingently, which just means that sensory strategies need to be used regardless of behavior, just on a regular basis, so that they are not reinforcing any particular behavior, they just happen. When I'm at work, I tend to get up and walk around about every half hour. It's non-contingent. It's not because I've accomplished a certain amount, or it's not because I've been, slacking off at my job. It's just that every half hour I need to get up and do something. And so those, in terms of using sensory strategies with children, those are the kinds of things that we need to focus on, is using them non-contingently and not as a result of a specific behavior.
And that I love that, because that makes so much sense to me, and especially with the alert program information. Obviously, we're talking about using all kinds of sensory strategies to support individuals, but the when we do it is going to be really crucial, and the non-contingently part is just a really good way to talk with each other as our colleagues, with our behavior colleagues, about why we want to do a sensory diet instead of, you talked about how you get up and you walk your half hour. As adults, we can justify that, ergonomically, this is good, posturally, this is good, da-da-da. Great, that's all true. And in terms of just keeping yourself together, that's true. And so when we look at sensory diet pieces being those pieces that we put in non-contingently, so I'll take that one away. That one I'll definitely use. It's really good and really important. So when we're talking with our colleagues, that's a way that we can share information, that we're respecting what we know to be true in behavior and learning, but making sure that we're working on getting those nervous systems set up. Because I think that's one of the things that happens, and I'll kind of a little bit diss on us as OTs, because we aren't taught a lot of that information in school and in our training, unless we get it as we come out of school, that a lot of times I think we scare the behavior therapists. They're like, oh, and kind of a misperception that I hear a lot of times is, well, who wouldn't like the OTs? They give kids rewards before the child even has to do anything, and that we have to do a much better job as OTs here to communicate that what we want to do is set the nervous system up for success, and when we're rewarding versus when we're setting the nervous system up for success, and then working with our team on what's the timing to do that. How do we look at when's appropriate to do that, so we don't create the learning of, oh, I get a better shot at this, I get to do more fun things if I melt down, or if I demonstrate the behavior that we're actually really wanting to not have the interfere with the individual's function. So I really appreciate that example there, MaryAnn.
Well, and the whole idea, I mean, and you just said it, is setting up the nervous system, and setting up the nervous system happens prior to a task that is difficult or a task that is challenging.
Right.
And so, and you always talk about the just right challenge. So part of setting up the nervous system is getting the nervous system ready to be calm and organized around a task, and then having a task that is the just right challenge, that's not too easy, that's not too hard, that's not too short, that's not too long, but that is, just the right challenge for the child. And of course, that's really difficult to do, and many times we think we've got it, but then we have to change plans midstream,
right,
because we don't have it. So sometimes it really is important to listen to the child, always important to listen to the child, even when they're beginning to get antsy, even when they're misbehaving, or starting to misbehave, to make sure that the next thing, which may be something that's fun, it may be something to help the nervous system become more calm and organized, but that happens on our terms and not on the child's terms. So in other words, if we sense that we have not quite gotten that just right challenge, that the task that we have assigned is really too long, and we're not going to be able to get all we want, then to be able to, in midstream, say, okay, this many more and then you're done, or this many minutes and then you're done, and then, because you finished, then you can go on to this thing that is fun.
Right, and that's huge, because I know, and I think a great way for us to relate to that as therapists is that we know this, we just don't have vocabulary, and we haven't been very good at talking to our colleagues about it. Because I know even when Mary Sue used to have OT students when we were working in the schools or at the clinics, that one of the things that we would teach the therapists as part of, and it's that art and science of teaching, it's that art and science of being a therapist combo meal, really, is that we always want to, when we enter into something, we can have the most wonderfully clinically reasoned activity in mind, and then on that day, in that moment, we so misjudged where the individual is or the rightness of that task for them in that moment, that we missed the just right challenge thing. And so Mary Sue used to always say to the therapist, okay, you planned this great thing, and what if it's not going well? What's your downgrading it and making it simpler and more successful so we can end successfully here and then do our reinforcing? Or how do we bump it up if it's just so easy that the kid's done and now we have not done anything therapeutic realistically, that kind of thing. So I think it's the same, I really view it as the same kind of thing in the behavioral sense, that we want to look at, have we met a right challenge? Is it realistic what we're doing? And then we talked about having like some kind of a salvageable demand if we've overshot. We thought this activity was going to go great. We thought the child could work and do this for 5 minutes, and now it's looking like that's not even going to be possible. So predicting that, seeing that ahead of time if possible, because we're all human, we all have the variabilities of all these things. That's when we're going to have to be prepared for that, and that's, I think, the trick in teaching. It's the trick in parenting. It's the trick in our therapy work as occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech therapists, behavior therapists, all that stuff. It's tricky business. It's not easy to do. We can't just program it in and there we go, it worked every time, first time every time kind of thing. It so doesn't apply to our humanness, does it? And Go ahead. You were going to say.
You and I had talked about the example of the homework.
Right.
And so I think that's
Yeah,
really
let's do that.
a good example to think about for people at home or in the school. So if you think about homework, of course, you come home from school, and that whole idea of setting up the nervous system is an important one, because you come home from school and you're tired and you're hot and you've been working for a while, so it's important
And it's a big transition for our kids who have those challenges with those transition times, sure.
Right. So, and, as you and Mary Sue have taught for many years, go to the mouse, and, the milk and cookies, there's a good reason for milk and cookies after school. And
That's right.
Also for some kids, possibly some physical activity if they've been sitting for a really long time.
Absolutely.
So the first thing about homework is setting up the nervous system to do it. So then we have the child who's doing homework, and they're whining a little bit, and they're getting antsy, and they're wiggling, and they're wanting to do other things. And so we think about because we're their parents, we want them to be happy. We don't want it to be a big thing.
Right. We don't want this to turn into an all-nighter here.
Right.
Yeah.
So we think about, okay, well, maybe they just need to take a break. So maybe we need to let them go ride their bike or, do something different.
You talked about even just like playing with your pet, all these great things that make life so rich and have a good sensory piece to them.
And really just take a little bit of time.
Right.
But in order not to reinforce the behavior, the whining, the asking to do other things, the antsy behavior, it really is probably important to make sure that a certain section is completed, even if it just takes another minute or another 30 seconds. Set a timer for this much more time, and then you're done. This many more problems, and then you're done. And then to allow them to engage in that sensory strategy and have the break. And that way we've reinforced them for doing what we've asked them to do, and given them the sensory break as well.
Right, and we've ended successfully. We did it. So we've had to scale back what our original demand was, but we still end with a positive note. They have success, we have success. Now we can reward and reinforce and all those good things. And so I really love that example, because I think we see that so often as we're looking at structuring our schedules for our folks that we care about, live with, work with, love, all that good stuff. And I think the alert program piece, because it's so much about building in sensory strategies throughout the day and trying to keep their level of alertness optimal so that we can do the best demand, the best task, the best learning, have them be able to demonstrate their knowledge the best, all those things are so important. And so that was a really nice example of that salvageable demand that we talked about. I really liked that, and kind of ending it and planning it as the adults in control of the situation, even though things haven't gone the way we originally maybe had planned it or anticipated it, that we have a way to end well, and everybody likes to end well, so that's nice here. I think another example you talked about, MaryAnn, was like in a restaurant, a little bit of an example about like how we would use the strategies preventively as opposed to reinforcing at the wrong time.
Well, and I think we've all seen kids that, whose families take them to fancy restaurants or restaurants that take a long time to prepare the food, and, have had the question, who thought that was a really good idea?
Yeah.
So, again, the ounce of prevention, so it certainly is important.
Exactly.
And it's fun for kids to learn that it's fun to eat out with your family, and it's a fun thing to learn and an important thing to learn, but it's also one of those things that, particularly with kids that have sensory challenges, that's important to think about ahead of time. Where are you going to take them, and is it a place that's going to be noisy? Is it a place that's going to have a lot of smells? Is it a place that's going to be easy for your student, your child to tolerate? And then thinking about, and many of the restaurants are so good at this these days because they have the crayons and the paper there to do. Or is your child going to need a fidget? Or is your child going to need, some water with a straw to suck on? What is your child going to need in order to wait effectively? So, and waiting is a skill that has to be taught just like any other. None of us.
True enough. We're not really good waiters, and I don't mean serving food. I mean waiting.
And none of us go to the doctor's office without a book or a magazine or something ready to wait. So thinking about those things in a restaurant, and then again preventatively, probably taking a walk ahead of time or doing something a little more active than having something to do while waiting. And again, being ready to know that this meal may not end in a very relaxed and peaceful way, but it may need to end more quickly than you had planned. But again, to let the child know that that we are going to leave when this happens, and try to make that thing happen as quickly as possible.
There we go. The ending up successfully. The adjusting our demand, so huge when we're planning all these lovely things. And one of the things that we talked about, I'm going to kind of skip here, as we're going to talk about a couple quick strategies for the different categories, because most of you on the call know that we talk about that there are 5 ways to move in terms of, and in the alert program anyway, we talk about the 5 different categories of ways. I said that wrong. 5 different categories of ways to change our engines. Evidently, my engine is not in the just right place at this very moment. And those categories are mouth, move, touch, look, and listen. And there are sensory strategies that we kind of qualify in those. And one of the things I thought about in light of this call was looking at the individual, whether you're coming from the parent, the therapist, or the teaching perspective here, having go-to strategies that you know are going to be good, quick setups in the different categories is going to be huge. So make sure to get together on your teams and do that a little bit. And in the mouth category, simple stuff. So singing, reciting things, rap songs, breath is a huge part of changing how alert we feel. Even one class in the Boston Public Schools, they just do S sounds and ha sounds just to get the diaphragm moving, just to get a little bit of good breath going there. Sucking on water through a straw, really, it seems too simple to be true, but really can be quite effective for our folks that don't need massive amounts of supports, and especially when we're plugging things in at those non-contingent intervals, then we need a lot less intensity in the strategies that we're choosing. And if that's a little too high level, then talk with your therapist about that. They'll have lots of good ideas for you there. In the move category, talking about in the Take 5 book, we mentioned about a teacher that put a pacing lane in the back of her room. And then I know, MaryAnn, you talked about a child that you knew that, you're wanting to, when they're young, have them sit on your lap and cuddle, and yet the individual idea of when you were reading to them wasn't cuddling exactly, right?
Well, and there's certainly children that can listen just as well and learn more and, benefit from what you're doing, but they don't necessarily sit in your lap and cuddle with you. And,
right.
I had a child that really needed to be walking around the room and touching things and, possibly playing with Legos or doodling on something, all the while that the reading was going on, and that was the thing that helped him to really process the information.
And, as much as we teach this and do this and work with this information, and I know it to be true, and we see it being even proven more true in so much of the research that's going on, it's just counterintuitive, isn't it, that's the case for that. So kind of keeping that in mind and helping people to understand that.
Not every nervous system is the same.
Oh, boy, and we have certainly learned that. And then so just moving for lots in the move category, just moving, having physical time, having playground visits, getting up and just taking a quick walk. Teens especially, I know many of you recommend a lot of really literally working out, that aerobic exercise and heavy muscle work are going to be so important in terms of, so we can relate it to fitness. It's an age-appropriate strategy. In the touch category, using fidgets when we are trying to listen or speak can be huge, and we see that often, and we're starting to see that more in the research. It's very exciting. Weighting transitional objects, something as simple for our kiddos as weighting a stuffed animal or having their heavy backpack. I know many of you know these things, but this is how we're going to be looking at plugging them in. In the look category, thinking about doodling, coloring, all that kind of stuff, because we know now that eyes on the teacher does not mean that you have their attention or that learning is occurring. And so I think we're finally growing out of some of that myth, and that's a good thing. Just nature environments. I notice how much I personally crave. One of my go-to strategies is watching water, watching fish tanks, watching a pond, having those kinds of nature experiences, both from the look and the listen, probably for a lot of that information. I like to hear the fountains. I like to see the ponds, that kind of thing. And then just music in the listen category, music that helps us to regroup, pump us up, or helps us with transitions, and many of you know some of the songs, the transition songs in our test drive book, and then quiet, which we have very little of in our culture anymore, using headphones, using ways that we help filter for those folks that really can't help filter. And there's a beautiful video that we'll put on your resource list about a young man's version of his experience of sensory overload, and it's like a 3-minute little video clip. It's really lovely. He's won some awards with it. It's very cool. I encourage you to look at that when we send you the resource list. Now we're coming close to the end, but I want to make sure we fit in these questions. We had a couple of questions that were really good. And so, MaryAnn, this one OT on the call asked about that they provide consultation services to an ABA program, and that the ABA folks would prefer that her focus was on the motor component and activity kind of things rather than the sensory verbiage. And any suggestions about how to blend the alert program into a traditional program? So the first thing is no blending. Not no, you can't do it.
No, the alert program again is intended to set people up to be able to benefit from all kinds of learning strategies, be they applied behavior analysis strategies or any others. And so the blending is probably not the best way to look at it.
Right.
But I really think it's important in terms of communicating with an applied behavior analyst or somebody doing a behavioral program is to think about, very objectively what it is that you're trying to do in terms of sensory setup, in terms of using the alert program, and objectively what you're trying to do, thinking about what it is that you actually want to see. So if you're talking about an engine running at the just right level, what does that actually look like? And how can you tell that this particular child's engine is not running at the just right level? Tell what is it that is looking like? And I think it's so important. This is such an important question because it's so important to understand that in order to benefit from applied behavior analysis, which we know through the research is the way, particularly for our students with autism, to learn, that in order to benefit from that, the nervous system has to be ready. And that's what the alert program is all about. I think we have confirmation from similar things, not the alert program specifically, but Aspian and Grossman mentioned sensory and biological needs in the ziggurat model, which is considered an important thing. So we're setting up the sensory and biological is at the bottom, and at the very top we're talking about tasks demands, including motor demands.
Right.
So those motor demands are not going to be met either unless the sensory system is ready. And I think it's very exciting, the research that's coming about, particularly, again, about children with autism and the way that they process sensory information and how important it is to think about their setting up the nervous system and helping their nervous system to efficiently process information in order to help them to be ready to learn.
And I think that helps so much to us as therapists, I think, that we have to talk objectively about what we mean when we say setting up the nervous system. I think that's wonderful. And if the team agrees, this is what looks good for this individual, this is what calm looks like, this is what organized looks like, not just throwing the words around, huge. So that will help a lot. And then I also wanted to throw in a nice quote from Temple Grandin about that. She talks about that therapies for any child with autism are interrelated. We can't just work on behavior or just on social skills or just on sensory. The progress is achieved in one area will affect functioning in another, and all of those need to be integrated into a whole to achieve maximum benefit. And I think that's, again, what our research is playing out here. I'm interrupting her quote, but basically that's what we're finding. When we have multiple supports for our individuals who have big challenges, we're getting the best results. So there's a duh that had to be researched, huh? So there we go. I want to get to this other question here. We'll probably run over about a minute or so, but if you have to hang up, go ahead and do so, and we'll get to things later. But we have about a minute and a half left, and an OT asked about, in a self-contained middle school classroom, the OT consults on a student who is engaging in spitting at people, at objects, that kind of thing, so spitting, and a behavior plan was implemented with moderate success. And towards the end of the school year, some of the other students were starting to engage in the same behavior. She was suspecting that this would be imitation. And did we have any suggestions for addressing this behavior? And MaryAnn and I just kind of laughed at the thing because my first hit on this is that this is highly likely not a sensory reason for this behavior. And one of the things MaryAnn and I talked about is that OTs, we can tend to overpredict that something is sensory-based, and we don't want to do that. So talk to us a little bit about the importance of looking at the function of the behavior, MaryAnn.
Well, in all behaviors, whether it's spitting, kicking, hitting, yelling, anything, beating a head against the wall, pica, any of those things, it really is important to look at the function. And if you're not familiar with functional behavior analysis, that's probably is something that's important to look at.
Absolutely.
The functions of behavior are escape. I don't want to be doing this anymore, so I'm doing this behavior to escape what it is. Attention. I want attention from the people around me, tangible, there is something specific that I want, and sensory, or in some of the literature it's referred to as automatic, meaning that the reinforcement comes from the nervous system, comes internally. And as Sherry said, unfortunately, some OTs tend to overpredict a sensory-based behavior that may not be. And this particular behavior, in my mind, I wouldn't want to say because I haven't seen the functional assessment.
Right.
But I would certainly want to look at what is the function, and through the behavior plan, was the function addressed? Did the behavior plan teach a behavior that was going to serve the same purpose, whatever that purpose was, that the child was spitting for? If he was spitting to get attention, did the behavior plan address his need to get attention and the appropriate ways that he could do that?
Right.
And, in terms of the other kids engaging in the same behavior, it's just telling me that they're getting attention. He got attention for spitting, and this is just my supposition. I haven't seen this situation.
Right.
But I'm supposing that the other kids saw that this student got a lot of attention for spitting, so they thought they'd give it the same.
We'll just join in.
Just try it.
Yeah.
And in the solution for that is to make sure that enough attention is given for more appropriate things.
Right.
So that would be my other question about this particular situation is, were those kids getting enough contingent, meaning because they did something appropriately, and non-contingent, meaning just because we like them, attention for engaging in more appropriate things?
And I think that's a great answer. And obviously, we're not trying to criticize the behavior plan, and we're kind of taking our best stab at it here. And I hope that that's helpful to the individual that submitted that question. We're going to wrap it up here because our time is coming to a close here. I want to thank MaryAnn so much for being with me here today.
Always fun. Thank you.
I really do appreciate it. It's a great feeling for me, and it is fun to talk this stuff because gosh knows what else would I talk about really. So. But if just a common sense disclaimer, if there was something on the call that didn't make sense to you or you don't feel like is correct for the individual that you're listening in for, then trust your judgment. Don't do it. Encourage you to seek some trained help, whether that's through us here at the Alert Program information or other trained professionals in your area. Thank you again, MaryAnn. I sure appreciate it. I know we ran a couple minutes over, but I hope that it was helpful to everybody on the call. So take good care, and we'll say goodbye for now.
Happy summer, everyone.
Bye-bye.